In this video, I want to go over a bit more about text boxes and the control you have over a text box. So once again, I have InDesign. I'm going to hit Create New, get my prompt here, and I'll do just a pretty standard setup. Single page, facing pages, 51p0, 66p0, or 51 picas, 0 points, 66 picas, 0 points, which again translates to 8.5 inches by 11 inches. I'm going to do just one column. Margins are set to 3 picas, which is 1/2 inch. And my bleed is set to 0p9 or 9 points, which is pretty standard for most documents. So this is all set. I'm going to hit Create and go ahead. All right. So now I have my standard InDesign layout for 2020. And I can have my properties inspector up as well as my pages. I could switch back and forth between those. I tend to keep my properties up. And I'm going to make a new text box. So just text tool. I can hit the letter T to get to it, or I can just click on that icon and drag out my type box. Now I'm going to make it the size of my margin. So I'm not going to go outside of that 1/2 inch boundary, but go all the way to it. And I want some text to play around with in here. So I go to Type, Fill with Placeholder Text. All right, so there it is. So what are some of the other things I can do with a text box? So we know that we can resize these. I can grab this corner, make it smaller, make it taller. With most Adobe programs, and this is a little different now with Photoshop as of the most recent version, but if you want to constrain the proportions, meaning you want to keep the ratio from the height to the width the same, hold Shift and drag from the corner, and that'll maintain that. So if this was a square and you held Shift, it would remain a square. It would keep those proportions locked. Right? And one of the first things I want to do to talk about these options here is on a Mac, I'm going to hold down Command B, or on a PC, Control B. And what Command B does, and B is in boy, and you can see in the bottom of my screen the command that's coming up. Command B pulls up my text frame options. General is, first thing it's asking me is columns. How many columns should this text box be? So each text box can be more than one column, 2 columns, 3 columns, etc. We can increase the gutter, which is the space between the columns here, and we can control the exact width. So say you didn't really care about the gutter as much, but the width of the columns you were worried about, that can work out there. Now, next option down is inset spacing. This link icon is darkened, meaning this is right now, these are linked together. If I change one, they'll all change. And inset spacing is this sort of inner padding between the edge of the text box and the text itself. Now that might be good if you wanted to say color your text box and indent the text away from that edge so the color doesn't touch right up against that edge, which tends to look a little nicer. And then we have vertical justification. And this is that if there's extra text in a column, we can control where does it go, to the top, the bottom, or the middle. So let me kind of set that up for you right now. I'll do a 3-column layout. I'm just going to delete some of the extra text here. All right, so now this column here is not a full column. When I hit Command B, and I can change where that text sits. So the vertical justification of the last column is aligned to the top. Now it's aligned to the center. Now to the bottom. And an option that I don't think you'll ever need to use or should ever use, justified. All right, so this is an interesting thing I have here. It works if there's only one piece of text. In another video, I'll probably show a couple uses that I've stumbled onto for that. Next option is column rules. So a rule is a little misleading or kind of confusing for some people. It doesn't mean a rule as in a thing that you have to do or a command to follow. Rule as in a ruler or ruled paper. Rule means line. So insert column rules means that there's a vertical rule or vertical line in between each column. And we can control the starting point, the end point, the position, how thick it is, what style line it is. So this could be a dotted line between each, or it could be a 2 thin lines, right? So it's a nice way to change up style if you want. And again, change the weight. We could also change the color and the tint, which we'll talk about in another video. So go ahead. Next, I'll do baseline options. All right. And that's the only two I'm going to go over on that for right now. So I'm going to cancel, or I'll hit OK on this. So one downside to this is that if I do a multi-column text box and I move the top, they all have to be the same height. So that's one downside to doing built-in columns to my text boxes. And there's another way we could do this instead. So I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to grab my type tool, make a text box the size of the page, type, fill with placeholder text, and now what I'm going to do is on my page itself, I'm going to go up to layout, margins and columns, and I'm just going to say, what if this page was a 3-column page? All right, and there's my gutter. I can control, hit OK, and I'm going to just grab my text box, and I'm going to make it the width of the first column ending before that gutter. Now, obviously, that doesn't fit all of my text. And another way I know that is because I get this little red plus sign down here. Anytime you see that, that means that there's more text being hidden that you don't see right now. So I'm just going to click on it once, and I get this little cursor tag, this little thing hanging on. I'm going to come up here, and I'm just going to click right in that corner. And what that did is it created what we call a threaded text box. I now have 2 separate text boxes, and if I make this one shorter, you'll see, as I change the height of one, the text overflows or wraps around to the next one. That's still not all of my text, so I'll go here and hit once again, click on that plus sign. And I could either just click in that corner, or I can click and drag out exactly what I wanted. So let's see if I can fit everything if I come down here. That still doesn't fit everything. All right, so what I could do is go to my pages, and I'm just going to click down at the bottom of my pages palette. I have this little plus sign for create new page. I click on create new page. I'm just going to zoom out a little. And I can do the same thing here. I can click on the plus sign, and so that's all that was left over. Those last couple of letters. And maybe on this page, I want 2 columns. So I'm going to go on my second page, layout, margins and columns, 2 columns, OK. And I'll make this the width of that. Oops, jump to it there. And now what's nice about this instead of the other way is that if I wanted to make these columns different heights, this one was here, and then maybe I had an image that I wanted to put at the bottom of this one. And this one, yeah, that one's the full length, that's fine. And it'll all overflow from one to the next. So as one changes, and you'll see if I make this a little shorter again. And one nice trick about InDesign, by the way, is if I click and move something, it doesn't render it in real time. However, if I click and hold for a couple seconds and then drag, it'll actually show it to me in real time. It'll actually render it while I'm moving. All right, one thing that I always do with text threads is I find that if you work on a really long document, or especially a newspaper where things tend to jump around, where a story might start on the cover but then continue on page 10 or something like that, I like to show my text threads. So if I go to View, scroll down to Extras, and choose Show Text Threads, when I click on a text box, if I don't click the text box, I don't see it. But when I click one, at the end of one text box, I get this line showing me where the next one begins. So I always know where my text is coming from or going to, which is, again, a very convenient thing to have. Right. So these are some of the basic text box options we have where we can control built-in columns, or, again, individually we can set up columns, and then we can continue text boxes out. So one big, long document, you could make it as many pages as you want. You could continuously thread text box after text box. Right. Again, I could skip a page if I wanted to add another page. You can see now I have a page 3. And now this is going from here to page 3 instead of page 2, right? And I can move this wherever I want. And if I want to get rid of one of those pages, just highlight the page and click on the trash can down here, and it'll get rid of a page. If there's content on the page, it'll give you a little warning. So if I delete again, well, that one didn't because it just overflowed. Sometimes you'll get a little, there's content on here, are you sure you want to delete message? Right? So that gives you a little bit more of an understanding on what you can do with text box options. Command B and build in columns and inset spacing, or just thread the text boxes yourself.